Man sees his girlfriend who died 3 years ago in the park and follows her. What he discovers is terrifying. Ethan hadn't been to the park in months. Since losing his girlfriend, Lily, 3 years ago, even simple places they once loved had become too painful to revisit. But today was different. Today, with a soft autumn breeze ruffling the leaves and his loyal dog Max at his side, Ethan found himself standing at the park's entrance, hesitating before stepping onto the path. It was as if the trees whispered memories of her laughter, her smile, a bittersweet invitation he could no longer ignore. This was where they'd once dreamed about the future, where they'd made countless promises under the stars. Before I continue, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next fantastic stories. Max, a golden retriever who had been with Ethan and Lily since they'd first moved in together, tugged eagerly at the leash, as if urging Ethan forward. The dog, sensing his owner's hesitation, gave a small whimper, nudging Ethan's leg. "All right, buddy," Ethan murmured, forcing a small smile. "Let's do this." They strolled along the familiar paths, Max trotting happily while Ethan's mind drifted through memories he had tried so hard to bury. For Ethan, each corner of the park was a reminder of Lily. He could almost see her sitting on a bench with her sketchbook in hand, capturing scenes with her delicate strokes. Lily had been a talented artist, her eyes always lit with a passion for beauty in the ordinary. Her absence still hung over him like a shadow, heavy and unyielding. Grief had settled into his life, becoming part of him, shaping his days and haunting his nights. He thought he had grown accustomed to the pain, had found a way to carry it without letting it consume him. As they reached the pond, Ethan sighed, gazing out at the water where they used to feed the ducks. He watched as the sunlight shimmered on the surface, lost in thought. But then, something, or rather, someone, caught his eye. A woman, standing across the pond, staring intently at the water, her hair catching the sun in just the way Lily's had. She was too far away for him to see clearly, but something about her posture, her presence, made his heart skip a beat. Ethan blinked, his mind reeling. It couldn't be, could it? He strained his eyes, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The woman turned slightly, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She looked exactly like Lily. The same dark hair cascading over her shoulders, the same slender build, even her movements echoed Lily's graceful confidence. Max tugged at the leash, sensing his owner's unease, but Ethan barely noticed. His heart pounded as he tried to process what he was seeing. It was impossible. Lily had passed away, taken by a tragic accident. This woman, she had to be someone else. A lookalike. A coincidence. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling, the eerie familiarity that washed over him as he watched her. Is this some kind of cruel joke? He wondered, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. He took a step forward, then hesitated. What if he was just seeing things, his mind playing tricks on him out of desperation? He had read about such things happening, about grief manifesting illusions. Yet something about her was so real, so undeniably Lily that he couldn't look away. A strange mix of dread and hope coiled in his stomach. The woman turned and started walking along the path, her gaze drifting through the trees as if she were deep in thought. Ethan's feet moved before he could decide, carrying him closer. Max followed obediently, his ears perked, tail wagging with curious energy. Every step brought Ethan nearer, but also made his heart beat faster. What if this was his only chance to understand this impossible moment? I just need to see her up close, he reasoned. Just to be sure. As they approached the bend where she had disappeared, Ethan's mind raced with questions. He was torn between logic and longing, trying to convince himself that he was mistaken while secretly wishing he wasn't. When he rounded the corner, he froze. She was there, standing beside a tree, brushing her hair from her face in the exact same way Lily had done. The resemblance was startling. Ethan's pulse quickened as he realized he was mere steps away from her now. Taking a deep breath, he dared to close the distance, his heart pounding louder with each step. She hadn't noticed him yet, seemingly lost in her own thoughts. As he neared, her head turned slightly, and their eyes met. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Her eyes, those were Lily's eyes, filled with warmth and depth, a mirror of the woman he had loved and lost. He stood there, speechless, a wave of emotions crashing over him, disbelief, fear, and a flicker of hope. But as she looked at him, a hint of recognition flickered in her gaze, and then she turned abruptly, disappearing down the path. Ethan was left standing alone, his mind reeling, the image of her haunting him. Was it really her? Or had he fallen prey to the cruel tricks of memory and grief? He had to find out, had to understand what he had just witnessed. Tugging at Max's leash, he quickened his pace, determined to follow her, to find answers to the mystery that had shaken him to his core. As he walked, a storm of emotions surged within him, pulling him back to memories and moments he thought he had laid to rest. Little did he know, his search would uncover secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about his past, and Lily's. Ethan's heart raced as he quickened his pace, eyes locked on the woman ahead. Every step he took toward her seemed to pull him deeper into a surreal haze, a space where the line between memory and reality blurred. The afternoon light dappled the trees, casting moving shadows that mirrored his own restless thoughts. He clutched Max's leash tightly, his mind reeling with questions. How could this be? This woman looked so much like Lily that it was uncanny. And not just her appearance, but the way she moved, the way she tilted her head slightly as she walked, as if she were drawn into some private world. His memories flooded back, sharper and more painful than they'd been in years. Ethan and Lily had been inseparable. She had been his first love, the one who taught him how to see beauty in the smallest details. She'd spent countless afternoons sketching in this very park, filling her notebook with trees, flowers, and passerby, each image etched with her soft, meticulous lines. Her laughter had filled this place, leaving echoes he thought he'd never hear again. Her loss had been shattering, a darkness that had swallowed his world, and Ethan had spent years clawing his way out of that grief. As he moved through the park, he caught glimpses of the woman ahead, her figure drifting in and out of view. Every time he thought he'd lost her, he'd spot her just a bit further along the path, glancing around as if she, too, were caught in a memory. He wanted to call out to her, but his voice seemed lodged in his throat. There was a fear there, too, a fear of shattering whatever strange spell had brought her here, of discovering that he was just chasing a phantom, a figment of his grief and imagination. Max trotted beside him, ears perked, occasionally glancing up as if sensing Ethan's distress. The dog had been a steady presence throughout his darkest days, his faithful friend during long, lonely nights and silent mornings. Max had been there when Ethan could barely get out of bed, when the weight of Lily's absence felt too heavy to bear. Now, it was as if Max understood that something important was happening. He stayed close, his quiet companionship both grounding and comforting as they continued their pursuit. Finally, Ethan saw her pause near a cluster of benches, her hand resting on the back of one as if waiting for something. He hesitated, watching from behind a tree, his heart pounding. He couldn't deny the truth any longer, this woman looked exactly like Lily. Her face, her hair, even the way she stood, everything was achingly familiar. His mind struggled to piece together an explanation, any possible reason for what he was witnessing. He'd heard stories about people who had doubles, about uncanny lookalikes, but this seemed too precise, too personal. He stepped closer, cautiously moving around the tree and into her line of sight. Her gaze shifted, meeting his, and he saw her expression change, softening with a recognition that was unmistakable. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice carrying a hint of disbelief. The sound of his name on her lips made his heart ache. It was the same gentle tone Lily had used, the same way she'd called to him across a crowded room, her voice always bringing a sense of calm. Ethan's knees nearly buckled as he took in her face, studying every detail to convince himself he wasn't dreaming. But then something changed. Her expression clouded, as if a shadow had passed over her thoughts. She took a step back, her face tightening. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her eyes avoiding his. "I think you're mistaken." She turned abruptly, beginning to walk away, but Ethan reached out instinctively, his hand hovering near her shoulder before he pulled back, unsure. "Wait," he called after her, his voice raw with desperation. "Please. I just need to know who you are." The woman stopped, hesitating before turning to face him. Her eyes were guarded now, and there was a hint of something cold in her gaze, a distance that felt like a wall between them. "I don't know you," she said firmly, though her voice wavered slightly, as if she were trying to convince herself. "I'm sorry if I look like someone you know, but I really must be going." She glanced down, clutching a small bag close to her chest, as if protecting something. Ethan's heart dropped, confusion swirling with the hurt that had been dormant for so long, now stirring painfully. Before he could speak again, a sleek, black car pulled up beside the path, its tinted windows glinting in the sunlight. The woman's expression changed subtly, a flicker of relief, and she moved toward the car, opening the door without looking back. Ethan watched, frozen, as she climbed inside and the car pulled away, leaving him standing alone on the path, his questions unanswered. A man in the driver's seat glanced briefly at Ethan, his eyes sharp and assessing, before speeding off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Ethan remained rooted to the spot, his mind racing. He felt as if he'd glimpsed a ghost, a haunting vision of his past now entangled with the strange reality of the present. His mind cycled through possibilities. Maybe this woman was a distant relative of Lily's, or someone who had changed her appearance to resemble her. But the recognition in her eyes, the familiarity of her voice, it was too real, too profound to ignore. As Max nudged his leg, Ethan knew he couldn't let this go. Whoever she was, she held answers to a mystery that he was only beginning to unravel. And he was determined to find out the truth, no matter what it took. Ethan spent the rest of the evening replaying the encounter in his mind, every detail carved deeply into his memory. The recognition in her eyes, the way she had whispered his name, the flash of hesitation before she left, it all felt real, too real to dismiss as a coincidence. And yet, every rational part of him tried to reason that it couldn't be her. He had held Lily's hand at her funeral, he had watched as her casket was lowered into the ground. He knew grief could create illusions, but this felt different. This was no ghost, she was real, alive, and somehow, impossibly, right there in front of him. Back in his small apartment, Ethan sat at his cluttered kitchen table, trying to focus his scattered thoughts. Max lay curled at his feet, occasionally looking up as if sensing his distress. Ethan absent-mindedly scratched the dog's ears, grateful for the comfort. He opened his laptop and began typing keywords: lookalike, lost relatives, mistaken identity. The search results brought up countless articles, stories of people who'd encountered doppelgangers, long-lost twins, and mistaken identities. One headline caught his eye: siblings reunited after decades, separated at birth. He clicked on it, reading with growing interest. As he read, a possibility began to form in his mind, one that both excited and unsettled him. Could this woman be someone connected to Lily by more than mere resemblance? The thought of a lost sibling, maybe a twin, struck him as far-fetched, yet it was the only explanation that didn't involve the supernatural. He remembered snippets of conversations with Lily, vague mentions of her family being complicated, but she had rarely gone into details. She'd been an only child raised by a single mother, and she had often joked that her family tree was a mystery even to her. Ethan decided to reach out to Lily's mother, Caroline. Although they hadn't spoken much since the funeral, he hoped she might have answers, or at least confirm whether it was possible that Lily had a relative she never knew about. Taking a deep breath, he dialed Caroline's number, his fingers trembling slightly as he waited for her to pick up. When she answered, her voice was warm but weary, as if grief had never quite left her. "Ethan, it's been so long," she said, surprised yet kind. "It's good to hear from you." They exchanged a few pleasantries, but Ethan couldn't hold back for long. He asked, gently, if there had ever been any mention of another child in the family, perhaps a sibling that Lily had never known. Caroline paused, a moment of silence stretching out so long that Ethan thought the call had disconnected. Finally, she sighed, her voice thick with sadness. "Lily never knew, but there were rumors. My sister once told me that my mother had a difficult birth, and only one baby came home. But it was never confirmed, and Lily's father, he left soon after. It was all a mystery to me, something I never had the strength to investigate." Ethan's heart pounded. He didn't want to give Caroline false hope, so he simply thanked her and hung up, his mind spinning. If Lily had a twin, a sister, then perhaps she was the woman he had seen in the park. He imagined the life she must have led, growing up without any knowledge of Lily or their family. And if she was out there, unaware of her connection, what would it mean for her to learn the truth? Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions, hope, sorrow, and a fierce determination to uncover what was buried in Lily's past. The next day, Ethan decided to return to the park, hoping he might see her again. He walked slowly along the paths, his eyes scanning the faces of people passing by, each figure a potential lead, each step a reminder of his strange encounter. Max trotted beside him, sniffing the ground with an enthusiasm Ethan could barely match. But as he retraced his steps from the day before, he saw no sign of her, no flash of dark hair or familiar profile. It was as if she had vanished, leaving him haunted by the image of her face, the way she had looked at him with both recognition and fear. He returned to the bench where he'd first spotted her, sitting down with a sigh as he tried to clear his mind. The park felt quieter today, the wind soft and cool, rustling the leaves. His thoughts drifted back to the life he had shared with Lily, memories that felt both tender and heavy. He remembered how she'd often stared into the distance, as if lost in a world only she could see. He'd asked her once if anything was bothering her, if she felt lonely despite their closeness. She had simply smiled, telling him, "I think I'm always searching for something I can't explain." As the hours passed, Ethan wrestled with memories and unanswered questions. He realized that Lily's comment now seemed more significant, as if she had felt a connection to something or someone just beyond her reach. His heart ached at the thought that Lily might have been yearning for a family she didn't know existed. And now, here he was, confronted by that possibility in the form of a woman who was her mirror image, a woman who seemed as haunted by the encounter as he was. With a heavy heart, Ethan finally left the park, feeling no closer to answers than he had been the day before. But as he walked home, he felt a quiet resolve settle over him. He would find her, learn her story, and piece together the fragments of this mystery. He owed it to Lily's memory, to the love they had shared, and perhaps even to the woman he had seen, a stranger who was as much a part of his past as his present. He didn't know where this journey would lead him, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. Ethan spent the next few days searching for clues, looking through old photographs of Lily, scanning social media, and even reaching out to a few of her friends. He tried to stay logical, to keep his emotions in check, but the thought of finding someone connected to Lily made his heart race with both hope and dread. What would she be like? Would she even want to know about Lily, about him? The more he considered the possibility, the more he felt the weight of what he might uncover. Determined to continue, Ethan knew that the only way to understand this mystery was to find the woman again, to ask her directly, even if it meant confronting painful truths. He could no longer ignore the possibility that Lily's story wasn't over, that her memory was alive, woven into the life of someone he had never met but somehow felt deeply connected to. As he drifted into sleep that night, he held onto a single thought: I have to find her. I have to know. And with that, he allowed himself to believe, if only for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, he was closer to finding the answers he so desperately sought. Ethan's search intensified over the following days, each moment bringing a sharper sense of urgency. He felt himself slipping into an obsession, driven by the image of that woman in the park, her face haunting his thoughts, her whispered Ethan echoing in his mind. He pored over every lead, retraced every step he'd taken that day, and spent hours on social media, hoping to catch a glimpse of her profile or find a tagged photo that would link back to her. The more he searched, the more elusive she became, as if her very existence were designed to evade him. The mystery consumed him, filling his nights with restless dreams and his days with endless questions. He found himself drawn back to the park, hoping that fate would let their paths cross once more. Each visit ended in disappointment, the faces of strangers blending into a blur of unfamiliarity, none of them holding the answers he sought. Even Max seemed affected by Ethan's tension, staying close to his side, his usual energetic bark replaced with a quiet, watchful presence, as if sensing that something in his owner's heart was deeply unsettled. One evening, frustrated and desperate, Ethan decided to visit a nearby cafe where he and Lily had spent countless afternoons. He ordered a coffee and found a quiet corner by the window, letting his eyes drift across the familiar room. Memories rose around him like shadows, their laughter, the way she'd scribbled little notes on napkins, her drawings of strangers she'd observed while they sipped coffee. He wondered if, somehow, she had known she was searching for something, or someone, all along, an invisible thread connecting her to a story she'd never lived to uncover. As he was about to leave, a conversation at the next table caught his attention. Two women were chatting, one of them mentioning a recent high-profile art show featuring an enigmatic new artist named Layla who had emerged almost overnight, exhibiting an incredible resemblance to a former artist, the late Lily Sinclair. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Layla. He held his breath, trying to listen without drawing attention to himself, picking up bits of the conversation. They spoke of her work's uniqueness, how she seemed both familiar and mysterious, leaving her past and identity largely unknown. Ethan left the cafe feeling electrified. Layla. Was it her name? And why did she choose it, so close to Lily's own? He clutched his phone, trying to calm his racing thoughts. With trembling hands, he typed the name Layla into a search bar, adding artist and gallery to narrow his results. Within moments, he found an article about a recent exhibition, along with a photograph of the woman he'd seen in the park. She stood beside one of her paintings, a strikingly familiar piece, a moonlit forest, just like the scenes Lily had painted. Ethan's chest tightened as he scrolled through the article, learning that Layla had emerged only recently and was rumored to be connected to a wealthy sponsor. The mention of the wealthy sponsor reminded him of the man in the car, the polished, impassive face of the man who had driven her away from the park. Ethan felt a pang of frustration. Who was he, and what was his connection to Layla? The article didn't mention his name but hinted at his support and influence, portraying him as a shadowy figure whose interest in the art world had only recently surfaced. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities, and he felt the pull of the mystery growing stronger. Could this man know who she really is? He wondered. The thought filled him with both hope and apprehension. Determined to see her work for himself, Ethan found the address of the gallery where her pieces were displayed. The next evening, he arrived just as the gallery was about to close, the empty hall echoing with a quiet serenity that only deepened the impact of her paintings. As he moved from piece to piece, his breath caught at the details, familiar brushstrokes, the soft blending of colors, the way each canvas seemed to hold both light and shadow in perfect balance. They were unmistakably similar to Lily's work, yet layered with a depth he had never seen before, as if she were painting from a place of lost memories. At the far end of the gallery, he stopped before a painting that struck him to the core. It was a portrait of a woman standing alone under a tree, her face partially hidden, her expression unreadable. But the more he looked, the more he recognized the details, the way she held her hands, the tilt of her head, the longing in her eyes. This was the woman from the park, Layla, but there was a strange loneliness captured in the painting that felt eerily familiar. Ethan wondered if it reflected her own isolation, a sense that she, too, was searching for something lost or forgotten. As he stood there, lost in thought, a voice behind him broke the silence. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice was smooth, cultured, with a hint of something unsettling. Ethan turned and found himself face to face with the man from the car, the man who had taken Layla away from the park. He was dressed impeccably, his gaze assessing, his smile one that didn't quite reach his eyes. You must be a fan of Layla's work, the man said, extending a hand. I'm Vincent. I manage her exhibitions. Ethan shook his hand, trying to keep his composure as he felt Vincent's sharp gaze study him. Yes, I knew someone who painted in a similar way, Ethan replied carefully, choosing his words. Her work is incredible. Almost as if she's painting from memories she's trying to uncover. Vincent's eyes flickered briefly, a hint of something unreadable passing over his face. Layla is a unique talent, he said smoothly. Her art speaks to people because it comes from a place of mystery, even to herself. She paints as if she's trying to remember something, or someone. Ethan felt a surge of determination as he looked into Vincent's calculating eyes. And does she know what she's searching for? He asked, his voice firm. Vincent's smile widened, though it held no warmth. Layla and I have an understanding, he replied, his tone laced with an implication that made Ethan's stomach churn. I provide her with support, and in return, she gives me exclusivity. She trusts me with her career, and I ensure she remains focused on her art, not distractions. Ethan clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to challenge Vincent's cold arrogance. He realized then that this man was holding her back, keeping her in his orbit, perhaps even manipulating her past. But Ethan wouldn't let this stop him. He was closer now, and he could feel the weight of unfinished business pressing on his heart, urging him forward. This wasn't just about Layla, it was about Lily, about uncovering the truth that had remained buried for so long. With a polite but forced nod, Ethan excused himself, leaving the gallery with a renewed sense of purpose. He would find Layla again, without Vincent's interference, and tell her everything. She deserved to know who she was, to learn the story that had been hidden from her all her life. Walking home, Ethan felt the beginnings of a plan form in his mind, a way to get to her without Vincent controlling the narrative. He had already lost Lily once. He couldn't bear the thought of losing the chance to reconnect with a piece of her again. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. Vincent's unsettling presence had awakened something fierce within him, a protective instinct that burned stronger than his fear. He paced his small apartment, piecing together fragments of his plan to meet Layla again, to tell her the truth before Vincent could deepen his hold on her. The connection between her and Lily felt undeniable, and if Vincent's control over Layla was as consuming as he suspected, she deserved a chance to reclaim her life and identity. With every step he took, Ethan grew more resolute, determined to reach her. The next day, he returned to the gallery, watching from a distance as Vincent entered, a self-assured, smooth figure moving with the air of someone who owned the place. Ethan slipped inside after him, waiting until Vincent disappeared into a back office before making his way to the curator's desk. He explained he was interested in Layla's work and that he wanted to leave a personal message for her. Though suspicious, the receptionist handed over a notepad, on which Ethan scribbled a short note, careful to keep his words both intriguing and sincere. "Meet me in the park tomorrow at noon. There's something you need to know about your past. Ethan." Leaving the gallery, Ethan felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The weight of his promise to Lily, and now Layla, hung heavy on him, and he knew that if she agreed to meet him, he'd have to approach her delicately. How could he reveal the possibility of a sister she never knew, the threads of a story she hadn't chosen, without causing her pain? He knew he couldn't force the truth on her, that it would have to be her choice to explore her past, but he also knew that she had the right to know. For the first time in 3 years, Ethan felt alive with purpose, as if fate had gifted him this second chance. The next day, Ethan arrived at the park early, his heart pounding as he made his way to the place where he had first seen her. He waited anxiously, watching every passerby, his thoughts racing. What would he say? How would she react? Max sat beside him, sensing his tension, resting his head on Ethan's knee in quiet support. Hours seemed to pass in minutes, the quiet hum of the park fading into the background as Ethan's anticipation grew. When he finally saw her approaching, his breath caught. She walked alone, her face calm yet curious, her eyes scanning the park as if searching for something she couldn't quite place. She stopped a few steps away from him, her expression guarded, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. Ethan stood, meeting her gaze with a mixture of tenderness and urgency. "Thank you for coming," he began, keeping his voice low and steady. She nodded, still watching him cautiously, her posture tense. "You left quite a message," she replied, a faint hint of wariness in her tone. "What could you possibly know about my past?" Her voice held an edge, as if she were used to brushing off intrusive questions, used to keeping her guard up. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of the moment. "I knew someone," he said carefully, "someone who looked exactly like you. Her name was Lily. She was everything to me." He saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes, something raw, curious, almost vulnerable, but she quickly masked it, folding her arms defensively. "I don't understand," she replied, her voice quieter now, softer. "How does that have anything to do with me?" Her question hung in the air, charged with tension, as if she sensed that the answer would challenge everything she knew about herself. Ethan felt the weight of his words before he spoke them, knowing they would change her world forever. "I believe that Lily was your sister. Maybe even your twin." Her eyes widened, a mix of shock and disbelief flickering across her face as she struggled to process his words. "That's impossible," she murmured, shaking her head. "I was raised alone. My parents, they never mentioned anyone else." Her words trailed off, her hands clenching tightly at her sides, and Ethan could see the storm of emotions gathering behind her calm facade. Gently, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a photo, one he had carried since Lily's passing. It showed Lily laughing, her face radiant with joy, her eyes crinkling in a way that was so uniquely her. He handed it to Layla, watching as she studied it, her expression shifting from skepticism to shock. "She looks just like me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if speaking louder would break the spell. She stared at the photo, her hand trembling slightly, as if she were afraid of what it meant, of the answers it might unlock. Seeing her distress, Ethan spoke softly. "I know this is overwhelming. I can't imagine what you must be feeling. But if there's a chance you're related, don't you deserve to know the truth?" Layla met his gaze, her eyes brimming with a mixture of pain and longing. For a moment, she looked as vulnerable as he felt, her guarded walls cracked open, revealing the fragile hope beneath. If what you're saying is true," she began slowly, her voice wavering, "then I've lived my whole life not knowing. Not knowing who I am, or where I came from." They stood there in silence, the weight of their shared pain and unspoken connection binding them. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you have more to tell me?" Ethan nodded, understanding that this moment was a fragile beginning, a tentative step toward answers they both needed. "There's someone else who might know more," he said cautiously, glancing around as if expecting Vincent to appear at any moment. "Vincent? The man from the gallery. I think he knows more about your past than he's letting on." Layla's face darkened at the mention of Vincent, her gaze hardening. "He's been in my life for years," she said bitterly. "He's helped me, but he's also kept things from me. I've always felt that he was hiding something, but I couldn't prove it." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, feeling a fierce protectiveness welling up inside him. "Then let me help you," he said firmly. "Let's find out the truth together. Whatever he's hiding, we'll uncover it. You have a right to know who you are, Layla. And you don't have to face this alone." Layla looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear, her guarded heart slowly softening. She nodded, her expression resolute, her voice carrying a new strength. "Thank you, Ethan," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. "I've felt alone for so long, like a part of me was missing. Maybe now I can finally understand why." And as they stood together in the fading light, an unspoken understanding passed between them, binding their lives in a way neither could have anticipated. Layla clutched the photo of Lily to her chest, her gaze distant yet intensely focused. She looked as though she was seeing her own reflection for the first time, grappling with a truth that had always been hidden just beyond reach. "It's like staring into a mirror I never knew existed," she murmured, her voice a mix of awe and grief. The reality that she might have had a sister, a twin sister, no less, seemed to shake the very foundation of her life. Ethan watched her struggle to process the revelation, his heart heavy with a mixture of sorrow and determination. He wanted to protect her from the pain, to shield her from the shattering of her past, but he knew she had to face it herself. "If there's one thing I know about Lily," he began softly, "it's that she would have wanted you to know. She believed in finding beauty in everything, even the parts of life that are hidden, even the parts that hurt." His words brought a faint smile to her lips, and she nodded, as if accepting a part of her sister's spirit into her own. After a long silence, Layla looked at him with newfound resolve. "If Vincent has been hiding this from me, if he knows the truth, I need to confront him. He owes me answers." Her voice was steady, edged with the strength of someone ready to reclaim what had been taken from her. Ethan felt a surge of pride as he watched her, admiring the courage it took to face her past head-on. "You're not alone in this, Layla," he reminded her. "We'll go together. Whatever he's keeping from you, we'll find it." They decided to confront Vincent the following day, agreeing to meet at a small cafe near the gallery to plan their approach. That night, Ethan found himself unable to sleep, thoughts of both sisters swirling in his mind. His heart ached with a mix of emotions, grief for Lily, the woman he'd lost, and hope for Layla, the woman who carried a piece of Lily within her. He wondered how different their lives might have been had the sisters known each other, had they grown up together, shared dreams, and maybe even found happiness side by side. It was a bittersweet imagining, one that made him even more determined to see this through. The next day, Ethan arrived at the cafe early, his heart pounding as he spotted Layla waiting at a table near the back. She looked tense, her fingers tracing the edges of the photo he had given her, her expression one of intense focus. When she looked up and saw him, her face softened, and she motioned for him to join her. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about her," she admitted, her voice low. "I keep wondering who I would have been if I'd known. If we'd grown up together." Ethan reached across the table, placing his hand over hers in a gesture of quiet reassurance. "We can't change the past, Layla," he said gently, "but we can uncover the truth. You still have the right to know her, even if it's through the memories and stories she left behind." She nodded, visibly moved, and together, they discussed their plan to confront Vincent. They would go to his office later that afternoon, ask him directly about her past, and demand answers to the questions he'd kept hidden for so long. Hours later, they walked toward the gallery, each step bringing them closer to a truth that had been buried for years. Layla's face was set, her eyes hard with determination as they approached the entrance. She reached for Ethan's hand, gripping it tightly as they stepped inside. The gallery was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of paint and varnish, and Vincent was alone in his office, reviewing paperwork with a calm that bordered on eerie. He looked up, his expression unreadable as he took in their arrival. "Layla," he greeted her, his voice as smooth as ever, but his eyes narrowed slightly when he saw Ethan by her side. "What brings you here?" "And with him?" Layla's gaze didn't waver. "I came for answers, Vincent. Real answers. I want to know about my past, about my sister." For a brief moment, something flickered in Vincent's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or maybe even guilt, but he quickly masked it, setting his papers aside and leaning back in his chair with a cold smile. "Your past?" he repeated, feigning ignorance. "I don't know what you mean, Layla." But she didn't back down. "Stop lying to me, Vincent. I know I had a sister, and I know you've kept it from me. Why?" Her voice was fierce, filled with the strength of someone who had finally claimed her truth. Vincent sighed, his expression hardening as he realized he could no longer avoid the confrontation. "Very well," he replied, his voice cool. "If you insist on knowing, then let's have it out." With deliberate movements, Vincent opened a drawer and retrieved an old envelope, its edges worn and faded. He slid it across the desk, his gaze steely. "This contains everything you want to know," he said, his voice almost taunting. "Your birth records, information about the family that abandoned you. The truth is all there, Layla. But I don't think you'll like what you find." She took the envelope with trembling hands, staring at it as if it held her entire life. Ethan reached for her, placing a hand on her shoulder as she opened the envelope, revealing the documents within. Her eyes scanned the papers, her breath catching as she took in the details. There it was, in black and white, the confirmation of her sister's existence, their separation at birth, and the circumstances that had kept them apart. Tears filled her eyes as she realized the depth of the deception, the years she had lost, the family she'd been denied. But as the initial shock settled, she looked at Ethan, her gaze steady and resolute. She knew who she was now, and no one, not even Vincent, could take that from her. Vincent watched them, his face impassive, as if their pain were no more than an unfortunate inconvenience. But Layla met his gaze, her eyes fierce. "You took my life from me," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet rage. "You tried to control me, to keep me from knowing who I really am. But you failed." She turned to Ethan, her expression softening as she spoke. "Thank you, Ethan, for giving me back a part of myself I thought I'd lost forever." Together, they left Vincent's office, stepping into the light of a world that now held both pain and freedom. The sunlight seemed sharper, harsher as Layla and Ethan left Vincent's gallery, the envelope with her birth records clutched tightly in her hands. The truth was still sinking in, her mind racing to keep up with the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She'd always sensed a part of herself was missing, a void that had never been filled no matter how much she tried to escape it. Now, with the confirmation of her sister's existence, that emptiness took on a new weight, one she hadn't anticipated. Ethan walked silently beside her, his presence a comforting anchor in the chaotic storm inside her. They stopped at a quiet cafe nearby, the soft clinking of dishes and murmurs of conversation providing a calm backdrop as Layla unfolded the documents on the table. Her hands shook slightly, her breath shallow as she scanned the information, each line a revelation that tore through the fabric of her identity. She had a twin, Lily. A sister who had grown up, lived, and loved, while Layla had remained in the dark, never knowing. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes misted with unshed tears. "I don't even know what to feel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan placed a steady hand over hers, a gesture of silent support. "There's no right or wrong way to feel, Layla. It's a lot. More than anyone should have to bear alone." His voice was gentle, the compassion in his gaze offering her a sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. He, too, was grappling with the magnitude of the truth. Not only had he lost Lily, but he'd now found her echo in Layla, a woman bound to her sister by threads of both fate and secrecy. He realized that Layla's grief was, in a way, his own, grief over a life they hadn't shared, over a bond that had been taken from them both. They spent the afternoon poring over the documents, each line of text another piece in the puzzle of her past. Her birth records confirmed that she and Lily had indeed been born as twins, separated shortly after birth, adopted by different families who had known nothing of the other's existence. Her adoptive parents had never told her. The weight of that betrayal settled heavily on her heart. Layla pressed her fingers to her temples, overwhelmed by the realization that her life, the very foundation of her identity, had been built on a lie. The people who had raised her hadn't told her the truth, hadn't even given her a chance to know her sister. As she sat there, Ethan could see the transformation taking place within her. Her sadness was shifting, solidifying into a fierce determination. She set her jaw, her eyes glinting with a newfound resolve. "I deserve to know who I am," she said, her voice steadying. "And I deserve to know who Lily was. She was a part of me, and now that I know, I can't just go back to who I was before." The strength in her voice brought a flicker of pride to Ethan's face. He nodded, encouraging her to follow this path, knowing that it was the only way forward. Over the next few days, they began piecing together Lily's life, starting with the places she had frequented, her friends, and her art. Ethan showed her Lily's sketches, her journals, and the old photos he had kept in a drawer by his bedside, too painful to look at until now. Layla studied each piece, her fingers tracing over Lily's handwriting, her face a mixture of wonder and sorrow. It was as if she were meeting Lily in spirit, connecting to a part of herself that had been a mystery until now. Ethan guided her through the memories gently, knowing that each glimpse of Lily's world was both a gift and a wound. The more she learned, the more Layla felt her sister's presence growing within her. She found herself dreaming of Lily, imagining their lives intertwined, wondering what it would have been like to grow up together. She asked Ethan question after question, hungry for every detail, desperate to weave together a story of her sister that would give her comfort and closure. She learned of Lily's love for art, her kindness, and her spirit of curiosity, and it both warmed and broke her heart. In each answer Ethan gave, Layla saw reflections of herself, moments where their lives seemed to overlap in ways she couldn't explain. Ethan, too, found solace in sharing Lily's life with Layla. Each memory he shared felt like a way to keep Lily alive, to honor her in a way he hadn't been able to before. As he told Layla about their shared memories, their dreams for the future, he realized that a part of him had been waiting for this, waiting to pass on Lily's legacy, to share her beauty and kindness with someone who could carry it forward. Layla's presence became a balm for his heart, a way to make sense of his loss, and though the pain of Lily's absence lingered, he felt a new peace growing alongside it. One evening, as they sat on a park bench beneath the same tree where Ethan had first spotted Layla, she turned to him, her gaze steady. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, her voice raw with emotion. "For giving me this chance to know her, even in pieces. I may have missed a lifetime with her, but I feel like, in a strange way, I'm finally finding my sister." Ethan's eyes softened, and he placed a hand over hers, feeling a bond form between them that was as unspoken as it was profound. "I think," he replied quietly, "that Lily would be proud of you. Of the woman you are." But even as Layla grew closer to her sister's memory, the shadow of Vincent loomed. She couldn't shake the anger she felt toward him, the frustration over his lies and manipulation. She had trusted him for years, had believed he had her best interests at heart, yet he had been a gatekeeper to the truth, hiding her sister's existence from her while shaping her life according to his agenda. The revelation of his deceit felt like a betrayal, and she knew that she couldn't find peace until she confronted him fully, until he was out of her life for good. Ethan supported her decision. Together, they crafted a plan to confront Vincent one final time, to demand he release her from the contract that bound her career to his control. Layla was determined to walk her own path, to create her own art, free from his influence. The encounter wouldn't be easy, and there was a chance Vincent would try to manipulate or intimidate her. But Layla knew now who she was, and she wouldn't be silenced or held back any longer. With Ethan by her side, she felt ready to face whatever truths or consequences lay ahead. As they walked through the city that night, the lights casting long shadows over the streets, Layla felt a sense of closure beginning to settle within her. The journey had been painful, marked by loss and revelation, but she had found herself in the process, reclaimed the pieces of her life that had been stolen. With Ethan's steady support and the memory of Lily guiding her forward, she knew she was ready to confront the final chapter of this tangled mystery and finally lay to rest the ghosts of a past she was now ready to embrace. Layla and Ethan walked through the city streets, the weight of their plans settling over them like a storm. The closer they got to Vincent's office, the heavier Layla's anger and resolve became. Vincent had manipulated her, kept secrets, and shaped her life in ways she was only now beginning to understand. For years, she had relied on him, trusted him with her career, and even viewed him as a kind of family. Now, those illusions had shattered, leaving her with a clear and urgent sense of purpose. She would confront him, demand her freedom, and finally sever the last ties he held over her. They arrived outside the grand building that housed Vincent's office, its tall, glassy facade reflecting the evening's fading light. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder as they approached the entrance. "You're ready for this," he said quietly, his voice steady and warm. "No matter what he says, remember, you have the power now. You know the truth." Layla nodded, grateful for his presence. She drew a deep breath, gathering her strength, and together they entered the building, each step echoing with the promise of change. Vincent's assistant seemed startled to see them, and before she could stop them, Layla and Ethan moved past her, making their way to Vincent's private office. The door was slightly ajar, and they could hear him on the phone, his voice smooth and controlled as he discussed business matters with someone on the other end of the line. Layla knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for an answer. Vincent looked up, his expression briefly flickering with surprise before he composed himself, his usual charm sliding back into place like a mask. "Layla," he said, setting down the phone. His gaze shifted to Ethan, a flash of irritation crossing his face. "And you brought company. This is quite unexpected." Layla stepped forward, her gaze unflinching. "Vincent, we need to talk. I want answers, and I want them now." Her voice was firm, laced with a steely resolve that left no room for his usual deflections. Vincent studied her, his mouth twitching into a faint, condescending smile. "Very well," he said smoothly, gesturing to the chairs in front of his desk. "Let's discuss whatever it is that's troubling you." Layla remained standing, her eyes locked on his. "I know the truth, Vincent," she said, her voice steady. "I know about my sister. I know you kept her from me, and I know you've been hiding things about my life, my past, that I have every right to know." Vincent's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look as he leaned back in his chair. "Layla," he began, his tone measured, almost patronizing, "everything I did was to protect you. To keep you focused on your art, on your career. The truth, your past, it would have distracted you, held you back." Layla's hands clenched at her sides, her anger simmering. "You kept me from knowing who I am, Vincent. You treated my life like one of your business projects, something you could mold and control. But I'm not your property." Her voice grew stronger, each word cutting through the silence with finality. Ethan watched her, his heart swelling with admiration, feeling the strength radiating from her as she took control. He had seen her transformation, watched her grow from uncertainty into this powerful, resolute force, and it filled him with pride. Vincent's expression hardened, his gaze turning cold and calculating. "And what would you do without me, Layla?" he sneered. "Who do you think helped you build this career? I introduced you to the world, gave you the connections, the resources to become who you are today. You'd be nothing without my guidance." His words struck a bitter chord, but Layla stood her ground, unshaken. "Maybe you did," she replied evenly, but that doesn't give you the right to control me. I'm walking away, Vincent. I'm done with your lies, your manipulation." Vincent's face twisted with anger, his calm facade finally breaking. "And you think you can just walk away?" he said, his voice a low growl. "You're under contract, Layla. If you try to leave, you'll lose everything. The galleries, the clients, everything I've built for you. Do you really want to throw it all away?" Layla felt a pang of fear, but she glanced at Ethan, who gave her a silent nod of encouragement. She took a deep breath, looking Vincent squarely in the eyes. "I'd rather lose everything than stay trapped under your control." For a moment, Vincent was silent, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. It was a momentary crack in his armor, a reminder that he wasn't invincible, that his power over her was slipping. "If that's how you feel," he said, his voice clipped, "then I won't stop you. But know this, Layla, the art world isn't kind to those who break ties. You'll be alone, with no one to protect you, and it's a world that will chew you up and spit you out without hesitation." His words were laced with venom, a final attempt to intimidate her, but Layla didn't flinch. "I'd rather face the world alone than live a life built on lies," she replied, her voice unwavering. "I have a right to my own story, to my own choices. And I have people who believe in me, people who don't see me as just a product or an investment." She glanced at Ethan, who nodded, his silent support filling her with strength. Turning back to Vincent, she added, "And I'll make it on my own terms. Whether you believe it or not doesn't matter." With that, she turned to leave, her head held high, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. As they walked out of the building together, Layla felt a surge of freedom she hadn't anticipated. The grip Vincent had held over her was gone, replaced by a liberating sense of control. She was no longer beholden to anyone. Her life, her choices, her art, all of it was finally her own. She glanced at Ethan, a soft smile breaking across her face. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted, her voice laced with both excitement and trepidation. "But for the first time, I feel like it's up to me." Ethan returned her smile, feeling his own sense of closure settling in. "That's all that matters, Layla," he said warmly. "You're free to decide what's next. And I think, whatever it is, Lily would be proud." Together, they walked away from Vincent's shadow, each step carrying them closer to the life that awaited Layla, a life where she could finally embrace the truth of who she was, unburdened and unapologetically free. The first few days of freedom felt like a blur to Layla. Free from Vincent's grip, she was left with both a newfound exhilaration and a creeping uncertainty. Every morning, she'd wake up with the realization that, for the first time in years, her life was truly her own. She no longer had to seek approval, no longer had to adhere to Vincent's carefully constructed image. Yet the open expanse of possibility felt both liberating and daunting. Ethan remained close, offering quiet support, his presence a constant reminder that she wasn't truly alone in this new chapter. Layla spent her days walking the city streets, allowing herself to rediscover the places that once inspired her without the looming shadow of Vincent's expectations. She'd always had an eye for beauty in unexpected places, a withering flower in a sidewalk crack, the colors of sunset reflected in glassy skyscrapers, the laughter of strangers carried by the wind. Each small detail now felt alive with potential, a spark waiting to ignite her creative spirit. She longed to paint again, but something held her back, a lingering feeling that she hadn't yet fully claimed her own voice. One afternoon, Ethan invited her to his apartment, sensing that she needed a shift in perspective. His place was small but warm, filled with soft light, plants hanging from the ceiling, and walls adorned with framed photographs and small sketches he'd collected over the years. It was a place of comfort, of memories he hadn't yet shared with anyone else. Layla admired the pieces on the wall, running her fingers lightly over their frames, feeling the care he'd put into each selection. She looked at Ethan, smiling with genuine appreciation. "It's beautiful here," she murmured. "Every corner feels like it has a story." Ethan laughed, his tone warm and slightly embarrassed. "I guess I've collected things over the years, trying to keep pieces of my past alive. It's my way of remembering where I came from, and who I am." His gaze softened as he watched her, and he could see that his words had struck a chord. Layla's eyes grew thoughtful, and she looked at him with a quiet intensity. "That's what I've been missing," she admitted softly. A connection to my own story. Everything I've done has been shaped by someone else's vision. I want to find my own, and maybe even Lily's. Inspired by his collection, Layla returned to her studio that evening. The blank canvases leaned against the wall, untouched and waiting, like whispers of an invitation she hadn't yet accepted. She felt an urge to paint, not for a gallery, not for the critics Vincent had always tried to impress, but for herself, for the woman she was still discovering. She placed a canvas on the easel, her hands trembling slightly as she squeezed the first splashes of color onto her palette. She closed her eyes, allowing her mind to drift to memories of Lily, memories of herself, the two lives that had somehow intertwined. The first brushstroke felt like a release, the colors flowing through her with an energy she hadn't felt in years. As she painted, images began to emerge, fragments of a life she had never lived yet felt deeply connected to. She painted a scene of two girls sitting under a tree, the golden light streaming through leaves, their laughter mingling with the wind. It was a tribute to Lily, to the sister she would never truly know, and to the life they'd lost. Tears blurred her vision, but she let them fall, each one mixing with the paint, blending into the art she was creating. Ethan visited the studio later that evening, finding her surrounded by her work, the canvases now filled with vibrant, soulful images that captured both her own journey and Lily's. He watched in awe as she moved between the paintings, her face illuminated by a quiet joy he hadn't seen before. "Layla," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "These are incredible. It's like you've brought her back to life." She turned to him, her eyes shining with gratitude and relief. "For the first time, I feel like I've found a way to truly honor her. And maybe even myself." They spent the evening talking, surrounded by her paintings, sharing memories of Lily and weaving them into Layla's newfound understanding of herself. The conversations flowed easily, filled with laughter and the occasional tear, as they shared stories, both beautiful and bittersweet. Ethan felt his heart swell with an indescribable emotion as he listened to her speak, as he witnessed her transformation from a woman controlled by shadows to one who had finally stepped into the light. He realized, perhaps more than ever, how deeply he cared for her, not just as a connection to Lily, but for who she truly was. In the weeks that followed, Layla continued painting, pouring her heart and soul into each piece, capturing the essence of her own story with a depth and authenticity that transcended any work she'd done under Vincent's direction. She began to attract attention, not from the wealthy collectors Vincent had once courted, but from art lovers who resonated with her raw, personal expression. People were moved by her story, by the strength in her brushstrokes, by the undeniable honesty in her art. For the first time, her work was hers alone, untainted by manipulation or expectation. As her reputation grew, so did her confidence. Layla began planning an exhibit, one dedicated to both her and Lily's lives. She wanted to tell their story, to celebrate the bond they shared despite the years of separation, despite the fact that they had never truly met. With Ethan's help, she found a small, intimate gallery that was perfect for her vision. The space was simple, with warm lighting and enough room for her paintings to breathe, for visitors to move through her journey, piece by piece. The night of the exhibit finally arrived, and the gallery was filled with a quiet buzz of anticipation. Friends, artists, and even strangers who had heard of Layla's work gathered to witness the deeply personal collection. As Layla walked through the gallery, greeting guests and watching their reactions, she felt a profound sense of peace. She was honoring Lily, honoring herself, and sharing a story that was no longer hidden in shadows. When she saw Ethan standing at the center of the room, surrounded by her art, his eyes filled with pride, she knew that this journey had given her more than just answers. It had given her a new family, a new love, and a future she had built on her own terms. The evening of Layla's exhibition continued, a gathering of art enthusiasts, friends, and curious strangers who had come to witness her story told through paint and canvas. As Layla moved through the crowd, she felt a mixture of vulnerability and pride. Each canvas held a piece of her soul, memories of her sister she'd imagined and emotions she had finally freed. People's reactions were powerful. Some whispered to each other, moved by the rawness of her work, while others stood in silent reverence, absorbing the story behind each brushstroke. Layla's gaze drifted over to a particular painting, a piece that had been one of her most difficult yet rewarding to create. It depicted two girls on a swing beneath an old tree, surrounded by the soft glow of twilight. It was an image she had conjured from her imagination, a world in which she and Lily had shared a childhood, moments of laughter, and the closeness of sisters. Standing in front of this painting now, she felt Lily's presence with a tenderness that both comforted and saddened her. She knew Lily would never see this work, never know the depth of love Layla had poured into each stroke. As she stood there, lost in thought, Ethan approached, his gaze gentle and filled with admiration. "I've been watching people walk through your gallery tonight," he said quietly, his voice brimming with pride. "The way they are connecting to your work, it's like they are seeing a piece of their own lives in yours." Layla smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "It's strange, isn't it? Sharing something so personal with strangers and seeing that it resonates with them. I feel like I'm finally meeting the world as myself, without any pretense." Ethan nodded, sensing the peace she had found, the acceptance she'd forged for herself through this journey. He reached for her hand, and she felt a warmth spread through her, a reminder that she no longer walked this path alone. "Lily would be so proud of you," he said gently, his thumb brushing against her hand. "You're carrying her forward, showing the world the beauty she left behind. But you're also showing the world who you are, and that's just as beautiful." Their conversation was interrupted by a woman who approached them with a kind, open expression. She introduced herself as a local art curator who had come across Layla's work in a review and had been moved by the story behind her pieces. "Your paintings have such an incredible emotional depth," she remarked, looking intently at Layla. "It's as if you're giving voice to something timeless, something we all feel but rarely express." The curator's words struck a chord, and Layla felt a wave of gratitude for the recognition. The curator lingered, then gently touched Layla's arm, her eyes warm. "I would love to speak with you about future collaborations, maybe even take your work on a traveling exhibit. I think people around the country, maybe even beyond, would be deeply touched by this story." Layla's heart swelled, and she glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. The thought of sharing her journey on a larger stage was both exhilarating and daunting, yet she felt ready to embrace it. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft with emotion. "I would love that." As the curator moved on, Ethan turned to her with a grin. "Looks like you're going international," he teased, his eyes twinkling. Layla laughed, a light, unburdened sound that felt freeing. "I suppose so," she replied, her heart brimming with excitement. For so long, she had felt like a shadow in her own life, her identity hidden and her story locked away. But now, she stood on the cusp of a future that was hers to shape, a life that was as open as the blank canvases she once feared to paint. As the evening wore on, the gallery began to empty, and a sense of calm settled over the space. Only a few close friends remained, sipping wine and sharing quiet conversations beneath the dim lights. Layla felt Ethan's hand slip into hers, grounding her, a gentle reminder of the connection they had forged through the trials of the past months. "Walk with me?" he asked, his voice a soft invitation. She nodded, her heart fluttering as they made their way outside into the cool night air. They walked in comfortable silence, the streetlights casting soft glows along the sidewalk. The air was crisp, carrying with it the subtle scent of rain, and Layla felt her heart beating steadily, as if attuned to the rhythm of the city around them. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low and reflective. "It's strange to think about everything we've been through. I never thought that following a woman in the park would lead to this." He glanced at her with a wry smile, and she chuckled, understanding the complexity of his words. Layla paused, turning to face him, her expression gentle but serious. "I never expected any of this either," she admitted, her voice soft. "But I wouldn't change it. Finding out about Lily, meeting you, it's given my life meaning I didn't know I was missing." Her words hung between them, laden with unspoken emotion. She felt vulnerable but also safe, as if he was someone she could trust not only with her story but with her heart. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze warm and open, and for a brief moment, they simply stood there, the world around them fading into a quiet, shared space. As they continued to walk, Ethan told her about his dreams for the future, how he hoped to find a new direction, perhaps within the art world, where he could honor Lily's memory and help people tell their own stories. Layla listened, her heart swelling with affection, knowing that her journey had sparked something within him as well. She realized that in searching for her past, she had found more than just answers. She had found a partner, someone who understood the depths of her loss and the heights of her newfound freedom. By the time they returned to the gallery to gather her belongings, the night had settled into a peaceful quiet. They walked back in, and Layla took one last look at her paintings, each one a testament to the journey she had taken, to the sister she'd lost and the strength she'd found within herself. She knew that this was only the beginning, that there were still stories to uncover, places to explore, and art to create. Her heart felt full, her spirit light, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. As they left the gallery hand in hand, a sense of calm washed over her. For the first time in her life, Layla knew exactly who she was and what she stood for. She carried her sister's memory within her, honoring Lily in each step she took, but she was also forging her own path. And as she looked at Ethan beside her, she felt a new sense of home, a quiet certainty that she would never again have to walk this journey alone. Together, they had faced the shadows, unearthed the truth, and emerged into a future as bright and boundless as the night sky above them. The days following the exhibition were a whirlwind for Layla, filled with phone calls, interviews, and meetings with galleries intrigued by her story. Her art, once confined by Vincent's narrow expectations, had become a voice, a narrative that resonated far beyond her own experience. The idea of taking her work on the road, of sharing her journey with people across the country, was both thrilling and intimidating. Yet, for the first time, she felt completely in control. Every decision, every piece she created, was hers alone, a tribute not only to her and Lily's shared past but to the future she was now building. Ethan stayed by her side throughout the frenzy, a quiet but steady presence, offering words of encouragement when she felt overwhelmed and reminding her to breathe when the attention became too much. She found herself leaning on him in ways she hadn't anticipated, relying on his calmness to ground her. His unwavering support filled her with gratitude, and she often caught herself watching him with a deep, unspoken affection. He had become more than just an ally in her search for the truth. He was her partner, the person who had seen her through her darkest moments and now celebrated her light. One morning, as they sat together in a cozy cafe, reviewing details for an upcoming interview, Ethan looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "Have you thought about taking a break?" he asked gently, his eyes warm with concern. "You've been through so much, and now with all this new attention, maybe a change of scenery would do you some good." Layla tilted her head, considering his suggestion. The idea of stepping away for a while felt both luxurious and necessary. She realized that while she was excited by her success, she also needed space to reflect on everything she'd experienced. She nodded slowly, a smile tugging at her lips. "Actually, that sounds wonderful," she admitted, her voice soft. "I feel like I need time to let everything settle, to reconnect with myself and with Lily's memory." She hesitated, glancing at him with a hint of uncertainty. Would you like to come with me? Maybe we could go somewhere quiet, just the two of us." Her invitation was tentative, vulnerable, but Ethan's face lit up, his smile warm and reassuring. "I'd love that, Layla," he replied, his tone gentle. "Let's go wherever you need to go." After some planning, they decided on a small coastal town that Layla had always dreamed of visiting. It was a place Lily had sketched once, a quiet seaside village with rocky cliffs, soft beaches, and an air of solitude that felt perfect for reflection. The thought of walking where Lily had imagined, of experiencing the scenes she had only captured in rough sketches, filled Layla with a sense of closeness to her sister that was both comforting and bittersweet. Ethan shared her excitement, looking forward to a quiet escape and the chance to truly connect without the demands of city life. Their journey began early one morning, the drive filled with comfortable silence and occasional bursts of laughter. As they left the city behind, Layla felt herself relax, her mind clearing as they passed rolling hills, dense forests, and quaint towns. The coastal air grew thicker, tinged with the scent of salt and seaweed, and when they finally arrived, the village welcomed them with a serene beauty she'd only dreamed of. It was a world away from the life she'd known, and as they checked into a small inn, she felt her heart fill with gratitude for the chance to experience it with someone who understood her so deeply. Over the next few days, they fell into a gentle routine. Mornings were spent exploring the town's winding streets, visiting local markets, and watching fishermen cast their nets into the sea. Afternoons were reserved for long walks along the cliffs, where they'd sit together, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. The beauty of the place, the simplicity of each moment, brought Layla a deep sense of peace. She felt Lily's presence in the ocean's rhythm, in the soft light of each sunrise, and in the quiet joy of simply being. One evening, as they sat on the beach watching the sun sink below the horizon, Ethan turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Layla," he began slowly, his voice barely audible over the sound of the waves, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him, curiosity mixed with a flicker of apprehension. "When I first saw you, I didn't just see a woman who looked like Lily. I saw someone I wanted to know, someone who was lost but incredibly strong." His gaze softened as he reached for her hand. "And now, after everything, I know I've found someone I don't want to lose." His words took her breath away, a warmth flooding her heart as she looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the quiet affection that had grown between them. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice catching, "I feel the same. This journey has been so difficult, but you were there with me, every step of the way. I never thought I'd find someone who understands me like you do." She tightened her grip on his hand, feeling a surge of gratitude and love. They sat in silence, the weight of their shared confession hanging in the air, both of them knowing they had crossed a threshold that would change them forever. Their time in the village became a mosaic of cherished memories, moments of laughter, quiet conversations, and shared dreams. Layla felt herself healing, the wounds of her past slowly closing, replaced by the steady, nurturing presence of her new life. She continued to sketch during their days there, capturing Ethan's laughter, the soft glow of the village streets at dusk, and her own reflection in the peaceful waters. Each sketch felt like a new beginning, an expression of the happiness she was finally allowing herself to feel. On their last day, they stood together at the edge of a cliff, looking out over the vast, endless ocean. Layla felt the cool wind tug at her hair, the spray of salt on her skin, and a deep sense of fulfillment. She thought of Lily, knowing that her sister's memory would always be a part of her, woven into the choices she made and the life she had reclaimed. "Thank you," she whispered to the ocean, a tribute to Lily, to the family she had lost, and to the love she had finally found. Ethan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Whatever happens next, Layla," he murmured, "I'm with you. We're in this together." She leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his embrace, the solid reality of his presence. She knew that life would bring challenges, that there would be days when her heart ached with the memory of her sister. But standing there with Ethan, she felt ready to face it all. She had found her way back to herself, and now, with him by her side, she was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, a future as boundless and beautiful as the sea stretching out before them. Returning to the city after their time in the coastal village felt surreal to Layla, as if she was stepping back into a world that no longer fit the person she'd become. The trip had brought her a clarity she hadn't expected, a quiet but powerful sense of purpose. She felt ready to face the future with a new perspective, no longer haunted by the shadows of her past. As they unloaded the car and stepped into the familiar streets, she glanced at Ethan, whose steady presence beside her filled her with gratitude. She realized that he had become an integral part of her life, his strength and kindness woven into the fabric of her new beginning. Ethan had sensed the change in her, too. Over the past days, he had watched her blossom, her once guarded heart now open to the world around her. He'd seen her reclaim her art and embrace her identity with a renewed vigor that inspired him deeply. Walking beside her now, he felt his own life intertwining with hers, his heart carrying both the memories of Lily and the promises of a future with Layla. The two sisters had come together in his life in a way that felt complete, as if Lily's spirit were giving him her blessing through Layla's quiet laughter, her resilient strength, and her unwavering kindness. As they settled back into their routines, Layla resumed her work with a new vision. She felt the pull to continue telling her story, but she also wanted to create space for others to share theirs. The curator who had attended her exhibition had reached out again, offering her a collaborative opportunity to develop workshops and community projects for young artists in the city. It was a chance to turn her journey of self-discovery into something that could inspire others, a way to make her art a bridge that connected people's stories. With a sense of purpose, she accepted the curator's offer, determined to give back to the art community that had supported her. The project quickly became her focus, and Ethan was her confidant, encouraging her ideas and helping her brainstorm ways to make the workshops meaningful. They spent late nights over coffee, drafting plans, sketching ideas, and finding ways to bring the vision to life. Layla's excitement was contagious, and she poured herself into every detail, from finding the perfect venue to selecting materials that would bring people together in creative expression. She wanted her workshops to be a sanctuary where people could find freedom, a place to explore who they were without judgment or limitations. One evening, as they sat side by side on her studio floor, surrounded by sketches and scattered notes, Ethan looked at her with admiration. "This project, it's incredible, Layla," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You're building something that will give people hope, something that will allow them to see themselves in ways they've never been able to before." She smiled, touched by his words, and squeezed his hand. "It's strange," she admitted. "For so long, I felt like I didn't know who I was. Now, I want to help others find themselves, too." Ethan leaned in, his gaze warm and earnest. "You're doing more than that," he said softly. "You're creating a legacy, something that will live on through every person who walks through those doors and shares a part of their soul." The weight of his words settled over her, and she realized how far she had come, from the quiet, uncertain artist she'd once been to a woman capable of shaping her own destiny. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had given her a sense of fulfillment that ran deeper than any gallery opening or exhibition could. As her first workshop date approached, Layla felt a familiar blend of excitement and nerves. She wanted it to be perfect, to honor both Lily's memory and the strength she had found within herself. On the day of the event, Ethan arrived early to help her set up, carrying boxes of paints, brushes, and sketchbooks, his expression both calm and encouraging. He helped her arrange the room, transforming it into a welcoming space filled with light, colors, and inspiration. When they finished, he gave her a reassuring nod, his eyes reflecting a quiet pride. "You're ready," he said simply, his voice filled with certainty. As the participants began arriving, Layla greeted each of them with a warm smile, her heart swelling with joy at the diversity of people gathered, students, professionals, retirees, each carrying their own stories, their own dreams. She led them through exercises meant to free their creativity, encouraging them to explore their emotions on the canvas without fear. It was a vulnerable experience, both for her and for them, and as she moved through the room, offering guidance and gentle encouragement, she felt a sense of unity forming among them all. She had created a space where people could be seen and understood, a place of healing and expression. At the end of the workshop, one young woman lingered, her eyes filled with emotion. She approached Layla with a hesitant smile, clutching a painting she had made, a simple, heartfelt piece that expressed her own story of loss and resilience. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've never had a place where I felt I could be this open. Your story, it helped me find my own." Layla's heart swelled as she hugged the young woman, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the path that had brought her here. When the last participant had left, Layla stood in the quiet studio, taking in the traces of the day, a spilled drop of paint, a forgotten brush, the lingering scent of creativity and courage. Ethan joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, and they stood in silence, letting the weight of the day settle over them. She knew that this was only the beginning, that there were more stories to uncover, more people to inspire. And as she looked up at Ethan, she felt a profound certainty that she had found her place, her purpose, and a love that anchored her to everything she had become. The two of them left the studio that night hand in hand, stepping into a future that felt boundless, as open and infinite as the dreams they shared. The journey was no longer about loss, but about life, about embracing every moment with a heart that was finally whole. The months that followed marked the start of something extraordinary for Layla. Her workshops grew, filling with people eager to discover not only art but a sense of self and connection. Word spread, and soon her studio was alive with laughter, introspection, and creativity. Layla watched as lives transformed within those walls, each participant finding a piece of themselves they hadn't known was missing. The studio became a haven, a place where people felt free to express their deepest truths. And with each workshop, each canvas that bore witness to someone's journey, Layla felt Lily's memory living on, woven into the very fabric of her work. Ethan remained by her side, both her biggest supporter and her closest confidant. Their bond had deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated, growing from shared grief into a love that felt as natural as breathing. They shared late nights filled with laughter and quiet mornings over coffee, conversations that spanned from the profound to the mundane. He became her partner in every sense of the word, grounding her during moments of self-doubt and celebrating every victory, no matter how small. They built a life together that honored the past while looking forward, a life built on a foundation of resilience, creativity, and trust. One warm summer evening, Layla and Ethan decided to take a walk through the park, the same park where they'd first crossed paths. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, the sky awash in soft pinks and oranges as the sun began to set. They walked in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, yet connected in a way that needed no words. When they reached the old bench where Ethan had first seen her, they sat down together, the familiarity of the place bringing a gentle sense of closure. Layla looked out at the trees, her mind drifting to memories of Lily, to the life her sister might have lived had things been different. But instead of the sharp pang of grief she used to feel, she now felt a quiet peace, a sense of acceptance. She understood now that Lily was never truly gone. She lived on in the art they had both loved, in the kindness Layla shared, and in the life she was building with Ethan. It was a gift Lily had unknowingly left her, the courage to live fully, to love without restraint, to embrace both the beauty and the fragility of life. Ethan, as if sensing her thoughts, reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "You've come so far, Layla," he said softly, his voice filled with warmth. "You've created something that will last long beyond us, something that's helping people find themselves the way you found yourself." She turned to him, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Ethan. You were the one who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You helped me find my way." They sat in silence, the magnitude of their journey settling over them like a gentle wave. The sunset cast a golden light over the park, and Layla felt a profound sense of fulfillment, a quiet knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "I want to take this further," she said suddenly, turning to him. "I want to create something lasting, maybe a foundation in Lily's name. A space for young artists who need a place to grow, to heal, to find themselves." Ethan's face lit up, his smile widening as he took in her words. "That sounds perfect," he replied, his eyes filled with admiration. "I think Lily would be incredibly proud." His voice softened as he continued, "And I know I'm proud of you. You're creating a legacy that's about more than just art. It's about love, resilience, and hope. You're giving people a chance to feel seen, just like Lily did for you." Layla's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her heart overflowing with love for both her sister and the man beside her. She realized that her journey had come full circle, that the pain of the past had been transformed into something beautiful and enduring. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Layla rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, feeling his warmth, his steady presence. Together, they watched the stars emerge, each one a reminder of the lives they had loved and lost, the dreams they had pursued, and the future they were building. Layla knew there would still be challenges, moments of doubt, and times when the weight of the past resurfaced. But she also knew she had the strength to face them, and that she had found a family, a community, and a love that would see her through. Months later, the foundation officially opened, a tribute to Lily and to every person who had ever felt lost, unseen, or unworthy of their dreams. The building was simple but inviting, its walls filled with art from those who had found a part of themselves within its rooms. The inaugural ceremony was attended by friends, artists, and supporters, each one drawn to the space by Layla's vision of connection and healing. Layla gave a speech that day, her voice strong and clear as she spoke of the journey that had led her here, of the sister who had inspired it all, and of the future they were creating together. As she looked out over the crowd, her gaze landed on Ethan, whose expression mirrored the pride and love she felt in her own heart. She knew that this was only the beginning, that together they would continue to grow, to love, to create. Her life, once marked by loss and uncertainty, had transformed into a tapestry of resilience, purpose, and joy. The foundation would carry her sister's spirit forward, a light for others to follow, a reminder that beauty could emerge from even the deepest pain. That night, as they locked up the foundation and walked home hand in hand, Layla felt a quiet contentment settle over her. The path had been winding, marked by both sorrow and discovery, but it had led her here, to a life that was rich and full, a life shaped by love. She glanced at Ethan, a smile playing at her lips, and he returned it, understanding without words. They had found each other in the most unexpected way, but together, they had built something that would last, a love that honored the past and embraced the future. And as they stepped into the quiet night, Layla knew that Lily's spirit would forever be a part of them, guiding them forward, a quiet, eternal presence in the life they were building, a life filled with art, hope, and an endless capacity for love. If you like this story, take the opportunity to see the others that are appearing on your screen right now, subscribe to the channel and comment on what you thought of this story. See you soon, bye.